Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 37 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. And today we are going over another one of Feilong's really wonderful packs. We've got here, this is in the same kind of vein for the flyers. He did a pack kind of redoing a lot of the flyers. This next pack is going to be redoing a lot of the aquatic animals, so we're going to get stuck into that. Plus, we've got a couple cool new animals coming up, and obviously you saw one of them in the thumbnail, so I think you guys will really enjoy this. So we're going to be starting off today with Attenborosaurus. So let's have a look at these guys. We'll get a good opportunity when one is kind of... there's probably look at this one up here. This one looks really nice. But here is Attenborosaurus. Really, really awesome. So Attenborosaurus to begin with was actually one of the ones that would probably look the most accurate. And everyone was like, oh, this one looks really, really nice. But there's also been a couple changes here that we're going to take a look at to make it look like the real animal. So one of the major changes to begin with, we already had that sort of, as we look at that, but you can see that in the skull. So you can see here the skull has been greatly expanded. Though it's got this long neck, it's actually more related to the pliosaurs. So those are animals that were kind of an off from the plesiosaurs or plesiosauromorpha, where it kind of had the... instead of the long necks like Elasmosaurus and Plesiosaurus, this was the group that became the big, bulky pliosaurs. That includes Leopleurodon and Pliosaurus and things like that. So these guys were an early relative, like Remodel, I believe, is a relative of these guys as well. Really, really cool. You can see there's changes to the head, made a lot bigger and bulkier as these guys were transitioning to eating larger and larger prey. We can have a look over here. We actually have some skin impressions from this guy as well, and that actually suggests that these guys didn't really have big feature scales. They would have very smooth skin, very similar to that of potentially like most other marine reptiles, and very smooth, almost would look like just normal skin to you and I. So that would help reduce drag in the water as well. And as I mentioned, these guys are a pliosaur from England, and these guys got about 4 meters long from that specimen, and about 14 feet. And these guys would have been eating fish and potentially other smaller animals and things like that. So they are related to things such as Maracales and Halophosaurus, and then they became the ancestors of things such as I mentioned, Leopleurodon and Pliosaurus, which is quite interesting. Really, really cool animals. Came from England. The holotype was discovered in 1880 and it was thought to be Plesiosaurus, species of Plesiosaurus. Then it was found to be completely different. So you can see the changes here. Really, really cool. A couple things I would like to add though is that these kind of shapes here, they were kind of added before. They were like ridges down the body. Based on leatherback sea turtles, but leatherback sea turtles have a very it's special adaptation for that. That helps reduce drag in deeper water, things like that. And it's very unlikely that these guys would have that same side of kind of ecology. So that would most likely just be really flat and round, almost like a smooth shell turtle. Wouldn't really have that. And then we can also look here. We can see some changes to the flippers. The flippers have been made quite a bit wider, it seems, because these guys would have big flippers to be able to swim around, things like that. And we actually have quite an extensive soft tissue of lots of these marine reptiles, these Sarcopterygians, that show that these guys had really, really rounded outlines and really big flippers that would allow them to really generate that push to be able to fly through the water. So that's pretty interesting. And also we've got here the little back tail. Let's see if we can find one that's a little bit out. No, this one's all right. We'll have a look at you, because you can see they've got this fluke, you could say, at the end of the tail, very similar in most other plesiosaurs and pliosaurs and things like that. A lot of them had this. But what's really interesting is that there was a blog post by Mark Whitten, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that could have potentially been horizontal as well, or potentially both. There's a lot of speculation there, but we know they had some sort of soft tissue like fin at the back of the tail. We just don't know exactly what it looked like for a lot of species. We do have some like preserved that suggest it was up like this, but there are some evidences that could suggest that it could be more horizontal, like a whale fluke, for example, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, really, really cool. I do love the Satinbrosaurus, and Feilong really did make some excellent changes to better fit the animal, and I just love the skull. You can see much bigger jaws, much better fits the skeleton, but yeah, really, really awesome. So we'll let them swim off and do their thing. We can have a look at the tail a little bit better now that he's out in the open water. Yeah, really, really nice. So let you swim off and do your thing. Next up, another one by Feilong from the pack. We're having a look at Ichthyosaurus. So we can see here, let's see if we can wait for one to go into the light. We'll have a look at you, because you probably look the nicest, but we'll have a look at you. We can see a lot of the changes here. We actually have some pretty good preservation for a lot of ichthyosaurs because they are preserved so well, and we have like the outline of these guys, especially like Ophthalmosaurus and I believe Ichthyosaurus as well. We have outlines and then others giving birth, things like that. So we have a pretty good idea of how round they were, but we can see some changes here. A lot more like teardrop shaped that allowed them to be better, allowed them to swim better in the water. You see probably some changes to the head there, some changes to the beak. Not quite as round and pointed, a little bit, not quite as pointed, more round, things like that, a little bit longer as well. And you can see that more teardrop shaped body, and he's got these big flippers going along here. You can also see that these have got quite a smooth texture. We actually have evidence of like ichthyosaurs potentially convergently evolving some sort of blubber to allow them to keep their body temperature more consistent in water, because water is very good at taking away heat. That's why a lot of even tropical whales and things like that will have some blubber, because water is just so good at taking heat away. You got to keep warm somehow. And then especially if you're a deep diver, like potentially a lot of Ichthyosaurus's relatives like Ophthalmosaurus and things like that, that really just kind of doesn't help. But you can see much more rounded body there. And you can see these flippers are just a little bit pointier. Much better fits the actual anatomy and what we know from skin impressions of these guys. And we've got this quite long tail. I would argue that we should probably add a little bit more of a caudal keel. So there's big muscles. Might find a better one to show it off. It's kind of hard to find a better one now, just because they're all dark. But maybe this one here, there would be a caudal keel. You can especially see on animals such as sharks, because these guys have a lot of convergent evolution with sharks. You would have these big caudal keels that would come out here and have big muscles that move side to side to allow that tail to kind of swim around and things like that, and have a lot of power behind them, because these guys were very much powerful swimmers, potentially pursuing prey and things like that. But yeah, I'm a really big fan of how this come out. I think there could be a few changes, maybe like make the eye a little bit more round instead of that slit pupil. But for the most part, it looks really, really nice. I'd also change the tail to make it a little bit thicker. We can add a little bit more of a caudal keel. Let me grab like that, but I think it still looks quite nice. Yeah, really, really cool. Maybe change the patterns as well. I don't really like a lot of the patterns from the marine reptiles, I'll be honest. But yeah, big fan of that. So we'll move on to our next guy. So here the Ichthyosaurus is moving out of the way. Next up, we have got Plesiosaurus. So we'll have a look at these guys swimming around. Look at you, aren't you a fun guy? This one looks nice. We can see some of the changes here, especially to the head. Plesiosaurus was more closely related, as in the group, like a Plesiosaur so that would be related to a lot more of those later plesiosaurs, like, of course, Elasmosaurus and Stegosaurus, and things like that. So you can see here the changes to the head. It doesn't have that king cobra head anymore, even though it does have those large feature scales, which it would not have been a thing on plesiosaurs. As I mentioned with the Antibarosaurus, they would have had smooth skin, and skin impressions of many relatives of plesiosaurs and pliosaurs show that they would have had very much very smooth skin, and almost very smooth, in any scales that they had would be pretty small, very just look smooth to help reduce drag. So none of these feature scales would have been there, but you can see Feilong has also changed the mouth there, made the little bit more accurate to the anatomies of these guys. So they've got a little bit more of a bulky head and these large interlocking teeth that you can see here. Even though everyone complains about not putting lips on the terrestrial dinosaurs, they did put lips on the plesiosaurus, which is really weird. And these guys have these such interesting interlocking teeth that they most likely wouldn't have had lips, but they did it anyway. But you can see the changes there that really do make it look interesting, and I think it looks quite nice. And you can see change of the skull does fit plesiosaurus, the models itself, and I would say probably the long body looks fine, a long neck. These guys didn't quite have the super long neck of things like Elazosaurus, Styxosaurus, but they were a little bit earlier, one of the early relatives. And these guys weren't too big either. They only got about 3.5 meters long, so not huge animals, but still really, really interesting regardless. See that long body there. As I mentioned, the skin would be smooth. You can see also the body's also been greatly rounded with these large pecs. Same with the Ankylosaurus. Would have been able to swim through the water perfectly fine. And you can see that big round body. A lot of comparisons of plesiosaurs have been compared to like a snake being kind of sewn through a turtle shell or turtle's body. And that's actually quite an apt comparison. That's very much how they looked. Though obviously a lot of research into plesiosaur necks show that they weren't as adept as, like, you didn't have the swan crating kind of things. They would have held them out in front of them, potentially used them to catch fish, things like that. That's still really interesting regardless. You can see that quite round body and flat as well. See if you can find another one that's a little bit better. You can see that quite flat body there. Looks really, really cool. I like that pattern on it. Looks interesting. And then you can see here also some changes tell as well with that little fluke at the back. So a lot of these plesiosaurs and pliosaurs did have that little fluke there, and I think it's a nice little detail to add. And you can see some changes to the flippers. A lot of the times, actually, they're reconstructed wrong. You can see the outlines better accentuated, and often the back flippers are actually a little bit bigger than the front flippers in some species. So it kind of these little changes and things that make them look so much nicer, look so much like more like the real animal. Really, only need to change the texture and things like that, and it would be perfect. Be a really, really big fan of these guys. Definitely excited about how these guys came out. So that's really, really cool. So we're gonna let these guys swim off and do their thing, just so we can have more space for our next big guys coming in. And you are being cheeky and going the other way. So next up, we have got... I'll get into it. There's a little bit of taxonomy I'm going to explain about these guys, but we have got here Kronosaurus. So this is a really, really interesting little like taxonomy thing, but we can see based here. You can see that really, really high skull and things like that. This is actually much more reminiscent of an animal that was considered Kronosaurus. So the story is, originally, there was Kronosaurus with two species. There was the Australian one, Queenslandicus, and then one from Colombia that I would believe was called Boykinensis. But in 2021... Kronosaurus was actually split into two because it was considered a dubious genus, or a nomen dubium. So basically, the people that did the study decided there really wasn't enough to really found on the holotype specimen to be able to create enough diagnostic features to be able to say, oh, this is definitely Kronosaurus, this is that. So basically, there wasn't enough to tell to help tell if other specimens were Kronosaurus or not. So what they did was they split it in two. So this is based off the Colombian Kronosaurus species and was actually renamed to Moncurosaurus boyanensis, and these guys actually look quite different from Queenslandicus, which was actually renamed into, I believe it's Enectus or something, Ecetus. Longmani is kind of what's been split. So the Queenslandicus is now Elongus longmani, and then this guy boyanensis is Moncurosaurus, or however you pronounce that. So these guys actually look quite a bit different than Queenslandicus. Queenslandicus, or Longmani now, is quite a long, like almost light. It actually looks more like the original before the model edit of this guy. So it kind of had that long body, kind of lean and mean. But Moncurosaurus is actually a really, really interesting animal. It's got this really tall and bulky skull, almost reminiscent of like a crocodile, with these big teeth. There's been potentially this shows that they could be specialized, and they did live with other pliosaur species, and potentially like earlier other animals as well. So it's very likely that these guys could have been taking different niches in the ecosystem, and Moncurosaurus actually took these adaptations and developed these large jaws to be able to bite and potentially eat like bulkier or larger prey. So that can include things like giant sea turtles, potentially larger plesiosaurs, things like that. So they basically just became bigger and bulkier. As you can see, they've got much larger and bulkier skull, and there's been recent skeletals of this guy, and it's actually based on a pretty good specimen, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, you can see that big bulky head that's based on that Moncurosaurus, and you can see that big bulky body as well. So basically, Moncurosaurus is the big bulky one, and Longmani was the original Queenslandicus, which had that, or Ecetus Longmani which was can't even speak now, which was Queenslandicus, is but leaner and meaner. Looks more like the original model for the game, which is a little interesting. So it's just been made a little bit different, just to add something a little bit different. And you can see these large flippers here. You can also see the back ones are slightly bigger, about 30% bigger, I believe. And you can see that big round body, although I would say the skin could definitely be smoother. And you can see those big teeth there. And one thing as well, you can see the flipper at the back of this tail. They didn't really have that too huge a flipper compared to a lot of other plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. But this little thing here, that dorsal fin, we don't really have any evidence of that. I think that's just a holdover from the original design. It still kind of looks nice, but in terms of accuracy, that of course detracts from it. But I still think it looks cool regardless. I really love this skin, especially this black and white skin. I really like the contrast and all of that. And you can see that big skull there. So this is not Kronosaurus itself now, though there is a bit of debate within that. It's they've suggested like maybe just either having this as its own species, the Moncurosaurus, and then just keeping Queenslandicus as its own thing. It's a little bit of a debate then, which in there, which is almost like normal paleontology. So they could have potentially done it other ways. Even like Darren Naish has disagreed and thought this was a bit more complicated than it needed to be, things like that. So it really is kind of just who you go off. But I was just basing this and saying that's Moncurosaurus because I think it's a little bit cool taxonomy thing we get to talk about, and I think it's really cool, and I really do love this edit. I think making it look a little different, a little bit bulkier, really helps accentuate it and give it a different look to the other pliosaurs in the game, like Leopleurodon, which we'll cover in the part 38. But yeah, really, really awesome. Big fan of that. So these 4 marine reptiles were all done by Feilong in his wonderful pack. But there was a mosasaur in his pack, but it wasn't quite as accurate as I wanted it to be to show off here. So we've got Pickle's Mosasaurus. So Pickle gets the sneak in a marine reptile. He did a Mosasaurus that we'll have a look on here. So we can see here everyone's favorite big bad Mosasaurus. So this is based off the largest species of mosasaur that we know of, Mosasaurus hoffmanni, and we can see some of the changes here. The big bulky head and they're much more streamlined. None of this osteoderm nonsense, though you can still see the texture still there. Mosasaurs were most likely very similar. We actually have some pretty good skin remains of relatives of mosasaurs. Well, not relative of Mosasaurus. So things like Plioplatycarpus and things like that. That showed that they had very similar scales to like snakes and lizards, because they are a type of lizard, or technically, whether they were more related to monitor lizards and other lizards and then to snakes is kind of neither here nor there. Kind of it's kind of agreed that we're in between them, though whether they're closer to one another, it's hard to figure out. But all that aside, we do have scales of these guys that show they had very, very small and potentially small keel scales across the body that changed across the body. And because they were so small, if you looked at the animal out like this, like if you're swimming next to it, you probably wouldn't notice it too much. But this big osteoderm thing is just not right. But you can see some changes to the head there, much more big, bulkier body. The Hoffman's mosasaur, as it's referred to in Prehistoric Planet, had that big bulky head, very much a big predator, the top predator of its ecosystem, killing things. And you can see that big skull, like that big fan with the big eyes as well. And then you can see that very streamlined body. Believe it or not, mosasaurs really only evolved in the last 30 or 40 million years of the Mesozoic, so they pretty much became dominant pretty fast and became a very varied, like Pelotosaurus, which was a mosasaur that actually like very much looked like ichthyosaurs. So they very much took over pretty fast and took over a lot of ecological niches, which is pretty cool. Also got here these quite rounded flippers as well. They would have been quite as much important for propulsion because they relied on their tail, and they would have been used to help steer the animal, things like that. You see that big streamlined shape, and then you get down into the tail. And what's really cool about the tail is that people used to reconstruct mosasaurs by basically like a really long eel type tail, but recent evidence has actually suggested that from like skin impressions of that, they evolved this like keel, almost like here, these big paddles that allowed them to swim much more similar to things like sharks and ichthyosaurs, which is really, really interesting. And we know that they had this big soft tissue like that. So this is the most recent interpretation, and I really do love it, and I think it fits actually on this mosasaur really, really well. So I'm definitely a big fan of this. Really, really do love it. So let's go down and have a look at you like this. Why not? Really, really awesome. Let's watch you swim. So look at that. Probably one of the closest, the best mosasaur edits so far. Really, really big fan. I do love Pickle's Paleo edits. Really has come out wonderfully. Could use with some new textures, new skins. It looks nice regardless. Big, big fan. So now we're moving on. We've still got some Furlong stuff on the go. We have got some land stuff he's done. So we are going to go and have a look at those. We have got here some feathered dinosaurs coming up, though the Consochnathus is not feathered. We have seen some edits to Compsognathus and Morus and things like that, but we're going to have a look at first at Compsognathus. So you can see this little guy's got some pretty good edits. So let's pause it and get a look. Let's see, these guys have already run off already, so none of them are in that nice blank area. Let's see if we can find one in there. Here's one that's close enough. So let's see if we can find one. There we are. This cute little guy, you can see some of the changes there. Let's actually clean that up so we get a good look. There we are. Here we are. He is bland, but you can see here a lot of the changes here. The one originally in Jurassic Park is obviously based off more 90s interpretation, very like lithe and stuff, but we can see some changes here. Skull's been greatly expanded a bit, it's a little bit bulkier. And then you can see these long hands, though they are still pronated. I keep mentioning dinosaurs had hands that were basically clap, 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 clap all the time. Not like a bunny rabbit, like they were forward facing and faced each other, so they would be able to clap. And then we got this rounder body here. It's got a bit of a... The original Jurassic Park one had a bit of a tummy tuck. You can see this one's a little bit more rounded, rounded body, things like that. Got the boot going down there as well. And you can also see those long legs. They had a very lithe animal. And you can see the tail's also been made quite a bit longer. And as I've mentioned a couple times, often Jurassic Park makes their dinosaurs' tails way too short. And you can see that's been greatly extended here. Got that big long tail. And though the one big thing that we're missing is that it has feathers. And feathers were most definitely a thing on Compsognathus, since it was a Silurus, I believe, early like theropod. I was going to say Silurosaur, but they're an earlier theropod, so they kind of had those feathers, especially like Archaeopteryx had feathers, and we know that later animals like Eutyrannus and most ornithomimids had feathers, so it's very likely that they ancestrally had feathers, and then some groups kept them, some groups maybe lost them. The whole feather debate, as I've mentioned multiple times, is it could be ancestral to all Ornithodyra, which is the group that includes pterosaurs and dinosaurs. It could be evolved multiple times in different groups. It's a very interesting debate. It's just we need the fossils, but considering what Compsognathus is related to, we almost definitely know that this guy had feathers. So, yeah, really interesting. I'm really excited to see some changes. We can get some really nice mods to get the feathers on the dinosaurs that need it, and the not plesiosaurs, pterosaurs that had pycnofibers as well. I'm quite excited to see that. But you can see this cute little guy, really cool guy, and he looks much better anatomy other than the hands. But definitely a big fan of that. So we'll let you run off and do your thing. So next up, we've got another little guy here. We have got a little feathered dinosaur from Dominion. We have got Moros intrepidus. Let's take a look at you because I like the movie skin. The movie skin's actually really nice. I like the black and red on it. Oh, let's see if we can get a good view of you. We'll have a look at you from there. At that. But here is Moros intrepidus. So Moros is a tyrannosaurid theropod that lived in the late Cretaceous of Utah, and is known from Moros intrepidus. And what makes Moros intrepidus so interesting is actually one of the earliest known diagnostic material of a tyrannosaurid in North America. So it's a very, very early relative there. It was found, as I mentioned, in like 2013, and it was described a new species in 2019 as Moros intrepidus. And the holotype, it's not really known for much, really only a few leg bones and some teeth. But there was enough to tell it that it was a Tyrannosaurid, so even though it's not that complete, it has enough diagnostic traits to be called a new species. And the name Moros comes from the Greek Moros, who was an embodiment of doom, and in reference to the establishment of the Tyrannosaurid lineage in America. So basically, this is the basically doom coming, because this guy would eventually become T-Rex, so to speak, though not technically. And Intrepidus is from the intrepid voyage this guy took as Tyrannosaurids migrated from Asia into America, which is with Moros, which is pretty interesting. So one thing that's really wrong about this guy is that he should have potentially 3 fingers. The 2-fingered thing is a little bit later in the lineages of Tyrannosaurs. So things like obviously Tyrannosaurus and some of those later Tyrannosaurs like Tarbosaurus, Daspletosaurus, they had 2 fingers. This early on, they most likely would have had 3 fingers. But they were small-bodied, they were cursorial, so they're good at running. They were quite good runners. And they had an estimated limb length, so the one in Jurassic World Dominion is much too small. This one's not too much bigger than a Compthe, so maybe like about a meter or so. In real life, they would have been about 1.2 meters tall, or have a limb length of about 1.2 meters, so probably a little above hip height for most people, and potentially about 70 or 80 kilograms. So about the size of like a large leopard is probably the best comparison for these guys, but they would have been quite slender, and they actually had proportions more similar to those of one of the mimids than other late Cretaceous Tyrannosaurs. So these guys were very good runners in that regard. And in terms of its phylogenetic relatives, it's actually been found as a basal pan-tyrannosaurian, and actually clades alongside Asian taxa from the middle of Cretaceous, such as Zygonulong and Tumulera, however you pronounce that. And this actually shows that these guys actually were part of a kind of transitional event. So these guys, the early ancestors of Moros kind of came from Asia into the Americas, and would have been exchanging biotas. This is something that's been happening for millions of years throughout the Cretaceous as well. They've been swapping faunas, especially into like Laramidia, places like that. Swapping faunas, things like that. And is well documented in a lot of other species and stuff like that. So there's a lot of biotic interchange at the time. So that's how these guys got into the Americas. So yeah, really, really cool little guy. I really do love the feathers on this guy. I gotta say, I really love the Moros. And I gotta say, Feilong, I want you to release that giant one that you put on the feather T-Rex. I need that in my life. That would be so awesome. I just want that. Can you give that to us, please? And if you're watching this, please do it, just because I love it. It's just so cool to see like this guy, because he looks so nice, and then you put it on the T-Rex and it's just incredible. So please, I've seen it, I've seen you put it in the Discord, please put it and release it for us. But yeah, really, really cool little guy, and Feilong did a really wonderful job based more on those better relatives. You can see he's got a much more rounded face and a little bit better anatomy, of course, longer tail, all that. It's got a better head and little crest, so it looks much more like its relatives, like Jimmy O'Gara and things like that. Really, really awesome. So we'll let you run off and do your thing. Really, really cool. So next up, second to last, another one done by Feilong. We have got Overraptor. So let's take a look at these guys. I want to have a look at the Dominion one because that's probably the best. We'll do what we did before and kind of delete a bit of that scenery there. There we are. So this is Overraptor. We can see a lot of the major changes here. One thing that is very common with Overraptor reconstructions is that they use its close relatives, so they often get the head wrong. But Overraptor Philoceratops has this very big and rounded beak here, as you can kind of see there, and it's been actually really well rendered in this one here. Feilong really did a wonderful job showing that off, and I love how the design actually translates quite well. So you can see it's got that correct head, and it's much bigger and bulkier and on a long neck. And you can also see the tail's been greatly shortened. The one in the original movie had a much too long a tail, and you can see it's greatly been shortened there. A little bit bulkier, things like that. And I love how the feathers droop off. The anatomy is pretty much perfect, other than the hands, as we'll get into. But we can see that big round body. Since these guys were much closer to birds than a lot of other dinosaurs, you can see they've got a lot more bird-like features with that beak and round body. They didn't quite have the bird hip yet, but they were on their way to. At least their relatives were. And yeah, just a really round body, that short tail, with most likely these tail fins in that. Really, and they definitely had feathers. We have pretty good evidence of feathers in these guys. And yeah, pretty cool. I would say the only major thing wrong with it is the arms. As I mentioned, with a lot of times these guys would have had much larger arms with very long fingers, and they would have been not pronated. They would be like, as I mentioned, clap, clap, clap all the time, very much like that, and they would have had very extensive wing feathers, so it could potentially for display or to help cover their eggs, things like that. Just from their ancestry, they would have had that. But yeah, other than that, this guy's pretty spot on. I'm actually a really big fan. So if Feilong managed to add and change the hands a bit and put like the feathers from the Pyroraptor on the arms there, I think that would be perfect. And it would really represent these guys quite well. But yeah, I'm a really big fan. I like how that skin's translated, especially the Dominion skin. And also this blank skin here is actually quite nice. A lot of these patterns are kind of weirdly reptilian though. That's kind of a thing with the some of the feathered dinosaurs in this game. They're kind of given like really weird reptilian patterns. But other than that, I think it's quite good. I kind of like this one. But yeah, big fan. Definitely like that. Yeah, especially like the Dominion one. I kind of like that stripe there. But if we just give it the proper wings and a little bit more feathering, so giving feathering across the neck there and around the whole body, I think that would look perfect. It'd be the perfect Oviraptor. So yeah, really, really awesome. Feilong really did a wonderful job with these guys. Let them run off and do their thing. And next up, now this is one I've been wanting to show off for a little while. I've seen it in the Discord and the modding Discord to get to see pictures of it. And really cool animals I really want to talk about for a while. So we've got Tethys Hadros by LA Studios. Let's have a look at you. So, oop, that's a tilt. That's not what we wanted. Here is Tethys Hadros. So Tethys Hadros is a genus of hadrosaurid from Italy and is known from the one species Tethys Hadros insularis. So this was discovered in the 1980s in an abandoned quarry in Italy. And it was from this quarry that a complete hadrosaur skeleton was actually found in 1994. And this is actually, it was originally kind of described and compared to Iguanodon, but this actually shows it was kind of different. This guy comes from the Campanian-Maastrichtian boundary, so lived about 70 million years ago, and then it was re-evaluated to come from about 81 to 80 million years ago, so lived about that time. So this guy was originally actually thought to be more of a dwarf hadrosaur because it kind of lived on the island. At the time, Europe was a string of islands, so that's kind of a reasonable assumption. And the previous proportions from the holotype are believed to be about 3.6 meters, about 12 feet, with a length estimated to be about 2.5 meters, and a total estimated body length of about 4.5 meters for this animal, or about 15 feet. And though that has been argued as an overestimate, the original holotype was named Antonio, was originally thought to resemble an adult, but it was later suggested that during looking through the bones and looking at the histology of the bones, that Antonio, the holotype, was actually a juvenile or a subadult. And then Bruno, we're going to talk about Bruno here, a little bit of a pun there, is another one that was discovered recently. I believe they talked about it recently as a 2021, so quite recent finding. Bruno was about 15 to 20% larger than Antonio and was found to be an adult from the histology, and showed with more robust body proportions and things like that. So Bruno was definitely an adult, and Antonio had then been estimated at about 338 kilograms, or about 700 pounds in weight, while Bruno was estimated to be about 514 to 84 kilograms, or a little over 1,100 pounds, which is, or even 1,300 pounds is like the maximum estimate for these guys. So, and as a hadrosaur, these guys had a really interesting beak, which is so interesting. Unlike most very duck-like or very big beaks that a lot of the hadrosaurs had, these guys have like this big spiky beak here that really makes them look super interesting. Probably helps with grasping tougher plants, things like that. So I'm in love with this kind of really cool beak. That's why I'm kind of a big fan. And they have a really unique anatomy in that regard. And they possess a large number of anapomorphies that show they have very peculiar anatomy. So this is potentially because these guys lived in a island habitat. So these guys are smaller habitats. So these guys had a lot of adaptations that were a little bit weirder to survive in these kind of slightly different environments. So what's also make this guy really weird, it has a bunch of really both primitive and derived features that are both from iguanodontians and hadrosaurs. So Tethys insularis is kind of a early branching off point in the hadrosaur lineage, potentially split off from that main lineages, potentially when it got lost on island, or it potentially could have re-evolved some of these traits being isolated. We've seen that before. And it has some traits that are very much like iguanodon, like that skull shape is a great example, the position of the supraorbital bone, and then that short neck, very much similar to its relatives, the iguanodontians. And then you have some that are more similar to the later hadrosaurs. That includes obviously like Parasaurolophus, Edmontosaurus, things like that, that have like Their teeth are ranged to batteries. That hand morphology is very much more similar to that of hadrosaurs. They didn't have like that huge thumb that most iguanodontians had, and a lack of an enorbital fenestra as well is quite interesting. So you can see they've got some other really cool traits that I'm going to talk about. As I mentioned, that beak there, that's got the like comb beak there. I don't even know what you call it, just like spikes. It's like a end of a shovel or something, like a rake. It's just so cool. I love that shape. And they've also got a really, really long pubic bone. I believe that's the right bone. It kind of goes all the way around here. It's just such an interesting animal. So, in terms of its relationships, it's most recently believed to be a sister taxa of Philax. So, it's a derived hadrosaur. So, it's from Hadrosauromorpha, and is one of actually the latest non-hadrosaurid Hadrosauromorphs that survived. So, it's one of the last of its kind of lineages before the true hadrosaurs took over. So being on an island potentially would have helped that. Often islands are a really great place for taxes out of time to hold on. We've got lots of modern and extinct examples of that, which is really cool. So these guys would have been related to Telematosaurus and Eotracheon, things like that, on their way to becoming kind of the hadrosaurs that we all know and love. But yeah, really, really cool. So you can see that wonderful skin. I love the skins on this guy. Especially this. This is the 2022 kind of one. It's all green. Would have fit perfectly on its island environment. LA Studios really knocks it out of the park whenever they release something. You can see on the pattern there with that on the tail there, the brown and the blue is just beautiful. This all blue one actually looks really nice, and this one, like the purple and pink, and also the orange, really just fits so beautifully. Really, really big fan. If you guys don't know, I love Tethys I just find it so interesting because of how weird it is and how much it actually tells us a lot about dinosaurs. Even though it's like not one many people have heard about, it's a dinosaur that can tell us a lot, and not about just about dinosaurs, but ecology and what the world was like at the time, and just a really, really cool animal. So, big fan of this guy. So, yeah, I think LA Studios really did a wonderful job with this guy. We'll let them walk off and do their thing. So yeah, look how beautiful these guys are. So, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.